talking about how much more likely we feel the pain of loss.
Right.
And I think that's what drives us to compete, is that fear of loss. But typically we haven't lost yet. We're just afraid to lose.
Right. Welcome to the ENSO podcast. This is a podcast for people engaging in the never-ending process of expansion and growth. The purpose of this podcast is to expand and grow through awareness, introspection, and stillness. We fundamentally understand that relative to all there is to know, we know relatively nothing. With this in mind, we will consider and reconsider interesting perspectives, ideologies, and strategies for the purpose of self-actualization. Josiah, what are we talking about today?
Chase, we're talking about competition.
Competition? What the heck is that?
So to me, competition is where you look it up and then you explain it because
there's a proper definition out there somewhere.
So, while I'm pulling this up, I'm going to tell you what competition is to me, and then we're going to see how far off. I am non-competitive in that fashion. I don't have to be right. So competition to me is where you're essentially looking at some other entity or point of reference, and there's a comparison that's made, and you're trying to hit or achieve a certain goal before that other entity does, if you're competing at the same time, or you're trying to achieve it faster, right? If you're looking at how fast they did that particular thing, or you're trying to hit some other type of metric like efficiency or something like that. So that's kind of what my general definition of competition is. That is not how I use competition in my life. I'll get into that, but I'll read what competition is. So competition is a rivalry where two or more parties strive for a common goal which cannot be shared, where one's gain is the other's loss, and then I'll leave it there.
Yeah, no, I think that I like how it says a common goal which cannot be shared. It's kind of an oxymoron. Common goal cannot be shared.
Cannot be shared, right, yeah.
It's counterintuitive. But that's ultimately one of the reasons that I really wanted to talk about competition today, is because I think that there's a lot of depth here to explore. I think that the concept itself is a bit counterintuitive. We, oftentimes in America, we think of competition as a mechanism for producing better results. Right? Have you heard this before?
Especially in the monetary system.
Right. Might be one of the foundations of capitalism, something like that. It's definitely central to what it means to be American. I think we have this sense of it's, we have to prove that we're better than. And growing up in that culture, I think I just accepted a lot of that. Didn't really stop to question it very much. But as I've gotten older, I've definitely started to question it. And that's what we're going to do today. We're going to do a deep dive into competition.
All right.
So let's have some fun. Anything in particular that you want to, any assumptions you'd like to clarify, any foundation that we'd like to lay for the conversation ahead?
No, I'm really open to, to just kind of questioning what competition is, how we see it, and then exploring it.
Okay. Yeah. Awesome. Let's dig in. So the first question that I had prepped for us today, which I'm really excited to explore, is what frequency or emotion is competition rooted in? And if this needs further clarification, that's okay. I don't blame you at all. I just, I like to think of things in terms of, like, what's the wavelength here? What are some what else is this associated with? What's it rooted in? And as always, I'd really like to hear your thoughts on that.
I would say it's typically, when I observe competition, it's rooted in a lower vibration or lower frequency. And what I mean by that is it's very broad. Everyone, or at least the application, pretty much everyone can participate in competition. And I think we brought up the word common, or the words common goal. But the reason that it's common is because competition appeals or applies to everyone, right? So I think that's what kind of makes the goal common, is that we all see that we want or maybe even need this particular thing, and we're willing to compete for it, hopefully to our gain, and unfortunately to someone else's loss, right?
And with the current conception of competition,
right,
it necessitates that someone has to lose here.
Right. And so I think that's what makes it more of a lower vibration or lower frequency, in my opinion, because it is more of a, you're thinking in binary terms, an either or. Either I win or I lose. Right. And so there's not much complexity there, right? And I also think that scarcity is involved, like fear is involved, because it's, what if I don't win? Right? What if I don't get this particular thing? And very few things that we're competing for are, have consequences that are that drastic, life or death. It's more of a emotional loss. We were talking about in an earlier episode, we were talking about, regret, right? How it's like, oh, I didn't do this thing, or I did this thing and it didn't pan out, and I feel regret. And we were talking about how much more likely we feel the pain of loss.
Right.
And I think that's what drives us to compete, is that fear of loss. But typically we haven't lost yet. We're just afraid to lose.
Right.
Right. So we don't even know what it's like to experience that particular thing that we're competing for when we lose it or don't gain it.
Yeah.
We may feel very happy, or we may have a lot of gratitude for the process or their journey. But I think some of us are so operating in so much scarcity and fear that we'll do anything not to fear loss. And it's unfortunate because we don't really gain the benefits of the competition, which is the preparation, right? The growth and expansion of ourselves.
Wow. Which is kind of why we're here, right?
Yeah.
So 2 questions nested within this larger question that you're just kind of pulling out of me right now is, number 1, what is the difference between scarcity and fear? So we're using them together here, and I totally understand why. And I think that in the minds of maybe most people, they're really hard to separate because they are so entangled and intertwined in daily life. But I think we could benefit from exploring that a little bit. And then also just pulling on something that you said earlier, that it's an emotional loss. And the question here that comes to my mind is there any other form of loss besides emotional loss? And the instinctual response might be, yeah, of course there is. I can tell you about 10 different types of loss right now. But when we really get down to the essential bits, I think we could have a pretty interesting conversation about, I wouldn't hesitate to argue the point that there is no other type of loss than emotional loss. And you probably already know where I'm coming from, where my head's at on that. And I'm not really interested in arguing any point. You know this. But I think it could be insightful to do that. Yeah.
No, I love that question.
It loves you back.
The difference between scarcity and fear. When I look at scarcity comes from place of lack. I think, for the most part, scarcity requires observation or comparison. Probably more comparison, right? So I've got to, before I know how bad I have it, I've got to actually see that there's something or someone that has it better.
Right.
And then it also, I think scarcity requires you being in an environment where things are better, but you don't behave in a better manner, right? So you're in an environment where you may have more opportunity, but you really clinch the opportunity that you have, and you don't actually branch out and expand and become better and do better things or do what it takes to prepare to become better. Right? And I think, I've observed that. I think you've observed that. Everyone's kind of observed that, where it's like, you have friends or family or even you at some point, and you go and you do everything that it takes to upwardly mobilize in society or whatever it is. And you get there and it's like you revert back to the norm or you regress to the mean. And that typically is rooted in scarcity, right? And so I think fear is kind of the emotion where, if we don't explore it enough, there's more of a comparison between where we've been, like, so what we fear going back to, and then the fear of the unknown. So I think if I'm going to tie this into competition, we fear the unknown, which in most cases is what it's going to look like or what it's going to feel like when we lose the competition. Right? We don't really know.
We don't know
until it actually happens. But I think scarcity stops you from competing in the first place. That's a different type of fear, where you don't even know or understand just how much fear you're in.
Oh my gosh, this you'll have to let me know if this rings true for you also, but it's reminiscent of Martin Seligman's learned helplessness. We fail to play the game because we have thoroughly convinced ourselves, we've integrated into our identity this belief that we cannot win, so why try?
Right.
There's no compelling reason to put on the gloves.
Yes. That, I think, is scarcity for sure in terms of competition. Now, scarcity can also act or manifest in a different way, where we try to absorb or win everything. Right?
Oh yeah.
Because that's more greed. Like we never have enough. There isn't enough, or we're afraid to lose everything we have, and then we don't actually realize that we have accomplished everything or done everything or acquired everything. Right. Which can also be detrimental to ourselves and the environment that we inhabit.
It's the I don't remember the attribution, but inside every greedy man is a small needy child.
Yes, there we go.
But we're lost on that. I think so often we think of greed as something independent of scarcity. We think of it as the antithesis of scarcity, right? Like, they have plenty, yet they still want more. They have this insatiable desire for more and more, and there's no upper limit to that. We've seen this. This is proven. There's research to back this idea. It's never enough. There will always be more to go gain, because we are craving that certainty, and we cannot have it fundamentally. Because certainty, this could be a topic of a whole nother podcast, but certainty is, in many ways, it's an illusion. We can have deep clarity, and I think that meets some fundamental human needs, but certainty is not for us. There are so many variables at play, yet we crave it.
We crave it. So you know, when I hear that, the question that comes to mind for me is, do we create certainty so that we could win at a game that we're not even really playing?
Ding, ding, ding.
Right? I mean, think about that.
Yeah.
It's like you're in a game that doesn't have a scoreboard, and you're like, hey, you know what? We're just gonna we're gonna create a mechanism for scoring, and then we're just gonna make up points.
Yep.
And we're like, but we're just taking a walk down the trail. Like, what? It's just not even applicable. You know, so I think with certainty, it's solving another issue. It's solving a different type of scarcity. And I think a lot of this is just simply existential dread. That's why we create competition. Because to distract from the game that we're already losing.
Right, because there's no way to win it.
There's no way to win it.
Wow, this got really dark.
But I think that's a healthy thing, right? Because then at that point, everything you do after you acknowledge that is essentially approaching the game with fearlessness. And fearlessness, in my opinion, is not necessarily the absence of fear. It's the acknowledgement of fear, and then choosing to do something, you know, regardless of the fear that you have. You're still attempting to achieve your goals.
Right. So, I don't know, it kind of comes back, like in my mind, to this concept of, what did we ask earlier?
What's the frequency or emotion competition is rooted in, or the difference between scarcity and fear?
Thinking of something different, but basically just the fact that there's really it was about possession. It was about well.
Are there any other forms of loss besides emotional loss?
Right. Thank you. Because we can't truly have anything. The emotional loss, you could make the argument that the emotional loss is the only loss because it's only a loss because you perceive it that way.
I agree.
And there's no, there's no way to win the game. There's no way to lose the game.
There you go.
You know, the experience is the entire point.
Right.
You know, which ties back into last week's episode, the soul curriculum. What are you here to learn? It might be different from what I'm here to learn. But what I'm confident of is that when we get together, you're going to be a mirror for me.
Right.
You're going to reflect back things that I need to see. And with any luck, I'll do the same for you.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what I'm here to learn is simply what I'm learning and have learned. Like, I'm not going to throw in, you know, something else in there, because the thing is, you know, I may not be here to learn anything, right? That may be me creating a game. But I think if I'm alive and if I'm existing and I am learning, then that is what I'm here for.
Right. You have found meaning in it. You have created your own meaning.
Yeah. Yes, it's a continuous thing, and it's continuing to create meaning as I go, you know, as I live.
Speaking of means, you brought up reverting to the mean earlier.
Yeah.
You know what initially popped into my mind? Family get-togethers.
Yes. Yes.
Do you know why I'm saying this?
I don't know why you're saying that, but
Okay.
that definitely means something to me. But I would love to hear why you're saying this.
Sure. Yeah. So I noticed this, something that I observed in others, and also And anytime I observe anything in someone else, I wonder why I observed that. Why did my conscious and subconscious mind make a mental note of that and think it was important enough to share with the conscious part of my brain, my prefrontal cortex? And so I started observing it and reflecting upon it and noticing this phenomenon that when I was around my family that I grew up with, and we've been on our own for some time now. We have lives that are totally independent of our immediate family. And that's by design, and I think that there are some great benefits to that, right? However, whenever I get back into that environment, I am accessing a younger part of myself. And so especially for two individuals who might say, I don't know, have a podcast about growth and expansion, it's kind of ironic. We're focused on growing, we're focused on expanding, we're focused on identifying limiting beliefs, we're focused on cultivating adaptive beliefs that serve us and serve the people in our communities, the people that we care for and care about. But at a family get-together, I might find myself falling into some old patterns of behavior, feeling some feelings that I have not felt in years, and wondering, what is going on here? Have I not grown? Have perhaps I imagined the growth, and this is obviously a temporary, disorientation due to circumstances. And I think that there's actually some research on this, though I've only scratched the surface of it, and I can't remember what university was doing it, but that there are strong ties to buried patterns in our subconscious that suddenly we find ourselves accessing again. And this can happen late into our lives. And I think it's so fascinating how we revert to the mean. We fall back into those old behavior patterns. And why? Why do we do it? Cues, triggers, memories.
Association.
Yeah. Exactly.
So I was laughing because I did sense where you were headed with that, right? And first of all, it's, you said, family get-togethers, or I was thinking about how there's generally some sort of dance segment, like the electric slide or whatever. It's
at all of my family get-togethers, for sure.
Poor Chase, he can't remember the electric slide, but he can remember it every time he's away from his family. But he's reverting back to when he was a kid and he couldn't do it. But no, I get what you're saying. I think my perspective on that is, growing up 6 of 7, and my mom's first child, I've kind of always had more an older brother mentality, or oldest brother mentality, with a youngest sibling treatment, right? And what I've noticed is that even though we're all adults, I have a brother who's in his mid to going on late 40s, and I'm 36. So, and then everywhere in between, 5 siblings. What I've noticed is that because they left home a lot, there was a big difference, a big disparity, right? So I had a relatively different upbringing, but also they didn't really get to know me in certain phases of life. I think particularly in the more young adult phases, right? If I'm 11 years old and my brother's 21, that's completely different, right? We're becoming closer on some of those things, but what I've noticed is that when we get back together as a family, because we're all spread out over the nation, we're doing different things, leading different lives, we probably meet up maybe, I don't know, every 2 to 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
And I've noticed that it's not only, or observed, it's not only me who starts to getting to that older mindset because of association, but it's also my environment. It's them and their level of comfort. And so what I've observed is, and significant others, like, different people that I brought around have observed it as well, but there's like this sense of, or there's this level of comfort or lack of comfort with not really knowing the adult me, and it's not because I'm not showing that as double negative, but I'm not hiding it, right? I'm not obfuscating, but they just haven't been around to see me operate as a man, right?
It's unfamiliar.
It's unfamiliar. And so what do? They tell stories about when I was a little boy, right? And that used to, from what I observed, that used to bother me, right? Until I thought about it, and I was like, well, they're just doing what it takes to be comfortable. They don't mean anything by it. Yeah. It's just that that's when they knew you. They knew you when you were 8 or 11 or 13. They didn't know you when you were 23 that way.
Right.
They spent the bulk of their time with you. And what I mean by that is, seasons. Every summer we would do certain things as a family. If I've had a little brother for 11 years, that's 11 years that I've experienced him, and then I'm gone.
Right.
The back 7, no idea.
Yeah.
Right? I could tell them all day.
New territory.
Right.
Yeah.
So I think your environment plays a role in it as well. That's what I'm saying. It's not just us, but it's also what our environment is, how comfortable they are, and what they need to do to feel comfort, sustain that comfort.
Absolutely. That environment is going to draw certain aspects out of us, and the individuals in that environment are going to attempt to draw out the aspects that make them feel comfortable.
Right. And sometimes as parents, sometimes as siblings, sometimes as aunts and uncles. Like, I have an uncle who, every time I get around him, he's like,
he wants to tickle you.
No, he doesn't want to. Not that uncle. Different uncle. But he's like, when are you gonna have kids, or where are your kids at, or you gonna, or he's something about a house. But these are things that he can relate to, and until, at least I think from his perspective, until I achieve those things, we can't really have a conversation, which is crazy to me because there's so many different things that we could talk about. But I think competition, to circle back, competition there's also a relatable aspect to competition. Yeah. That's where the common goal comes in. Everyone on the basketball court can relate to the rules of the game. Yep. Right? They can relate to the emotional ebbs and flows of the game, right? So I think there is an emotional component there. There is a relatability. I think that's the proper term. We can edit that out if we need to. But and so I think, thanks for bringing that up, because we compete a lot when we get in these family environments, and sometimes if you're the younger sibling, right? You're kind of at a disadvantage.
Yeah, you're the underdog.
Yeah, you're the underdog. Sure. Until you're not. Anymore.
Until you're not.
That's heartbreaking for some people.
Right. Yeah. So, and I think just before we move on to our next question, which is a perfect segue for us to talk more about, the benefits of competition. I don't want this to be a competition slam discussion, but where do we learn to compete? Family dynamic. Yeah. I mean, it's not the only answer, but it is a prime candidate. It's a top contender for where most of us learn to compete, especially if we grew up with siblings, which I know we both did.
My gosh. Yeah. We learned to compete definitely from siblings. I think also our neighborhoods, depending on like how we grew up, our communities, I think they encourage competition, positive and negative competition.
Right.
And then, our social groups, if our parents are involved in certain things like, church or just different community organizations, and we get exposure to, other kids or other people in the community or in those organizations, I think there is some sort of competition, because it's like, oh, my son did this or my daughter did this, and then it's like, well, my son did this or my daughter did that. Most people are going to have something to offer, but we pick up on that. We pick up on that.
At a very young age. It's like you said earlier, it's very broad. It's nearly universal in terms of its reach, and it's very easy to grasp and understand, and it takes root in us very, very young. And that's why I thought it would be such a great topic today. So before we go into maybe the back half of the conversation, let's talk about some of the benefits of competition. And if you have some that you're already thinking of, then I'll let you go for it. If not, I'm happy to kick off this conversation.
Oh, go ahead.
All right. So I would say that I am instinctively competitive on some level, and you can see that in some of my personality data, but competition is not core to who I am.
Yeah.
So this is a little bit foreign.
I've seen you at Free Play, man, by the
way. Right, and that is my point, is that in the context, let me back up. The beauty of competition, to me, is in the gamification of it.
Yeah.
So when we can engage in play, when we can forge social bonds through team efforts, which is more, perhaps a bit more collaboration than it is competition on some level. However, the common goal that only one team can have, I think, does have this funny way of driving relationships inside one of those cohesive groups or a team. So I love games. I think games are a direct line to engagement. And I think engagement is where we get into flow states. It's where we do our best work. It's where we have our best ideas. It's where we make meaningful connections. It's where we find the courage to open up and be honest and transparent with the people that we care about, is when we're engaged, as opposed to when we're distracted or when we're perhaps absorbed in incessant thought. Those are very different states from a state of engagement. So that, to me, is one of the primary value drivers for competition. And though it's laced with a bit of collaboration in there, which we'll definitely get to later. Yeah.
Well, something I thought about, I'm glad you went first, but something I thought about, now I don't think you said this, but when you talked about the two different teams and what it does for, each individual team, I agree that it definitely does that. I also think that it promotes respect for the opponent. So if you lose, and it's something that it hurts emotionally, but I think it also, for most people, that if they see that they'll get another shot at competing for that particular thing, they're going to see something in their opponent that beat them that they respect. Right? They're going to say, you know what? I lost, or we lost because of this. They had this, and we had this other thing, and it wasn't enough to win. How do we go get that? I respect that they had whatever that was, whatever that attribute was, right? So I think it's going to promote respect. That's one benefit. I think it also promotes gratitude for the process of preparation. So when the Dallas Cowboys practice all week, they have film study, they get out on the practice field, they run through all the scripting and everything, right? They've got it down. They know what the defense is going to do. They know what the offense is going to do. And then they get out there and they compete. They're going to understand before the end of the game if they were prepared enough, if their process was enough. And, there's going to be a reckoning. And so I think if you approach it in gratitude as, hey, I prepared for my challenge, I came up short or I won, and either way, I am grateful that I was able to put in that hard work and ultimately, I think, cultivate and exude the one thing that I think competition brings out of all of us is our self-determination, right? So, sure, you may be on a team, but every individual has to bring it.
Right.
And if they're not self-determined to actually show up that day, prepared, then I think it's going to be evident, and they will probably lose. Right? So I think those are my 3 benefits: promotes respect, promotes gratitude, and then highlights self-determination.
I love it. I think we did it justice. I think we really built it up, so let's tear it down.
Okay, sounds good to me.
No, I think there's value in flipping the script, and we don't really need to have a fan fest over competition, because it is already a widely accepted cultural value. You can see competition next to trust and hard work in posters in elementary school. It's ubiquitous. However, what I'm really excited to dig into today is how does competition erode our ability to collaborate? And so, drawing on, one of the benefits, promoting respect for opponents, this is beautiful. And I love it when this happens. It does not always happen, does it?
No, it doesn't.
That is a very adaptive response to loss, which again, it's an emotional loss.
Right.
There's
and the reason the caveat there was, I was saying if you acknowledge that you may get the chance to get another shot at it, then I think that's where it cultivates the respect.
Oh yeah.
But ultimately, if you have the loss and you're like, I'm never going to see this again, it's much more likely that you're going to not respect your opponents, and or not respect something about them that helped them win, and you're just going to probably try to tear them down to make yourself feel better.
Yes, but
about the loss.
Taking a step back also, and appreciating the fact that the majority of human beings are not nearly as rational as you are.
Right. And so I agree. I think that so because that is the case with the majority of human beings, me sometimes for sure, I think that is often how it works out, where it's this nasty thing where, and unfortunately that happens before the competition even starts right? I mean, I think we're bringing that element into it before, and it's like, no, let me just get nasty from the beginning. And we see it everywhere. It's ubiquitous. Right, like you said. So I think, that's a nasty element of competition.
Right.
What else we got? Let's throw some more stuff. Yes.
Well, I think of how, let's zoom out to the widest lens that I can think of right now, which is world hunger.
Okay.
So, and I'm going to have to look this up, and I'll correct myself if I get it wrong, but I think sometime in the 1970s, it was researched and stated that we have achieved kind of a critical mass in terms of world resources. We had the resources to end world hunger. Mm-hmm. We could do it logistically. However, we don't have a high degree of international collaboration, mm-hmm. cooperation. We have groups that are very interested in meeting the needs of their people. We have this in-group, out-group bias, which I think is inherent in the context of competition. I think it's unavoidable whenever we have a common goal that both parties can't have, mm-hmm. or sometimes a common goal that only one of many parties can have, and then also tying in greed for a second, right? This fear that we won't have enough, and that flame turning into a raging inferno of consumption and overconsumption and detrimental overconsumption, mm-hmm. right? Where we reach the point where we are consuming so much that we are polluting ourselves or polluting our world or polluting our communities. It's the antithesis of moderation. Right. It's
a glut.
It's a glut. Thank you. And it's rooted, to me, I think of this as being rooted in scarcity. And we're no longer existing in that paradigm, yet it's old hat. It's a habit that we cannot break, mm-hmm. or we are struggling to break. Mm-hmm. And does it serve us anymore? That's kind of one of my major questions, is like when it comes to rethinking the premise upon which that we build our lives, competition it's one of those. It's one of those common cultural values. And when we have collaboration as an option, what's the comparative utility of competition anymore? Is that still an argument that you think is winning?
Well, I mean, I'm tracking everything you're saying, and I think we're at the point where people are collaborating to compete.
Mm. That's good.
Right. So I was reading about Kroger. There's like some sort of antitrust exploration going on, because I believe it's Kroger that they're trying to compete with their rival Albertsons, and they're trying to acquire some more stores. No, they're trying to actually do an acquisition of Albertsons, I think.
Okay.
That's the case. I have to don't fact check me on that, but my point is, we're at the point now where we have prodigious rivals that are now teaming up to compete against who or what?
Fear. Scarcity. Making it other people's problems, not theirs.
And I would argue the original thing that we're competing against, time. So they want a longer runway of shareholder profits, of being an employer, of distribution, supply chain management, mastery, and overlordship to some degree. And meanwhile, like to your point, there's world hunger challenges that could be solved with the same level of due diligence and innovation. Because I guarantee you, whoever's doing the acquisition or whoever's doing the merger has probably never seen anything like that before.
Right.
In terms of all the assets and liabilities and just all the different things that have to come together that you have to engineer,
right,
financially, legally. And so I think there's a ton amount of resources that are being applied to initiatives like this that could be better used, like for initiatives that are actually, I think, going to make a bigger difference
Right.
against the thing we're all competing
Mm-hmm.
against, or for the thing that we're all competing against, which is our survival through time.
Right.
Right. So, maybe it needs to be framed in a different manner where people could actually see, like, well, we see the benefits of these entities combining forces.
Mm-hmm.
We see what they're competing against, but what will be their legacy? To what end?
Right. To what end? What a valuable question.
Can you eat money? Right?
No.
Can I feed someone who's starving? Yeah, right. So, but I could feed, or I could develop a supply chain or a distribution network with those two entities. They could actually do things, and maybe they're already making the attempt. Maybe that's what this is all about. Maybe. But they could do things that could solve challenges that we've been facing for far too long.
Right. Right.
If survival is the key, why are people still starving to death?
Right. Right.
We haven't figured out, but yet we're, before the end of the century, I think we'll be somewhere around 11 billion in terms of population. So, that is, to me, it's fascinating because ultimately solving world hunger does the same thing that combining two of the biggest grocers in the world, or America, would do. It basically buys us more time.
Right.
One as a business entity with all of its aspirations, the other as the human species.
You know what's so interesting about this to me is that there's fear around consolidation. There's fear around loss of personal freedom, of autonomy.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's kind of like competition is like, yeah, you're gonna lose your autonomy. Oh no, if they get together, then they'll have all the power.
Mm-hmm.
And we need the power decentralized so that, because corruption, where there's power, there's corruption.
Mm-hmm.
I think of zooming in a little bit from world hunger to, let's look at the U.S. and we have our major election coming up.
Mm-hmm.
And we have such a polarized country, right, with these two rivals, political parties that are thoroughly convinced that they are good and the other is evil.
Right.
They're willing to die on that hill.
Yeah.
Right. And I think that is comfortable, even though it's horribly uncomfortable. It's comfortable in a sense because it's familiar.
Yeah.
And we can draw on that familiarity and interpret it as comfort. Also, if say one of the parties was to just run away with it, and the other was to fall into, kind of fall off the charts in terms of popularity and mind share and heart share of the American people, suddenly we have a single source of power. And that opens up a whole nother array of issues and challenges and fear around corruption. So I just think it's interesting. How much more could the country accomplish if they were united? We talk so much about gridlock and the stalemates that occur and like the breakdown of our political system and the finger pointing as to whose fault it is. When we take a step back and we're like, oh, it's clearly like, these two forces roughly equal in power, diametrically opposed. What do we expect to happen? Right. Of course progress is blocked. Of course we're moving at the pace of a snail. But when we dig into it, it's like, The alternative might be progress might be even scarier than being stuck. Ooh,
right.
Interesting.
And can we operate within progress without having a scarcity mindset? And what I mean by that is, typically, this has been my experience.
Right.
Typically, the people, or even myself, when I have operated in scarcity sometimes, typically when that happens, we're not aware of the progress that we've made. There's not a gratitude there.
Right.
We're looking around at our environment and we see that there's a misalignment, but we don't always realize that the misalignment is our mindset with or relative to the progress of the environment. And that's why there's a mismatch. And typically that results in some sort of overcorrection, some sort of hostility. There are plenty of people today that are Americans and have liberties that their parents or grandparents didn't have. It's like a fact.
Oh, yeah.
But yet they have a similar mindset that they're victims in some way.
Right.
And that's a scarcity mindset, in my opinion.
Right.
I think it is, we've got to reference where we are relative to our environment, the other participants, the competition. We've got to reference that on a continuum of where we've been. If you can't really understand that the only person or entity you are competitive with is yourself, first and foremost, it's just you. No one else matters at that point. If you can't understand that, then you'll never do what it takes to really improve and to do something that ultimately matters.
Do you think that competition with self drives that? Doing something that really matters?
No, I think doing something that ultimately matters is when you, like I was saying earlier, when you can see the improvement in yourself and understand that you can improve far beyond where you're at. That is competition, but it's competition with self in time.
Right.
And then ultimately what that does is, if I'm competing with myself, and that's all that matters to me, I'm improving so much that anyone that looks at me in my environment, anyone that knows me for a span of time, it raises the standard for them. It elevates how they do things. And yes, that can be competitive. But ultimately, that one person that's just been competing with themselves, been thinking about their own improvement, they're not really competing with anyone else. Is that?
No, I'm tracking for sure. But you've sparked a new idea for me as well. And the idea is this. What are the impacts of competing with ourselves versus, and this might sound funny at first, versus collaborating with ourselves? So how do we flip the script again, double flip the script, and say, can we befriend ourselves and time, where we don't want to compete with time anymore, but we want to coordinate with it?
Absolutely.
And leverage it.
Yeah.
Right. And where the the gravity or the flow of the situation isn't painstaking. It's not hard fought. It's not competitive.
Right.
But it's loving, honestly. And this is kind of, I'm drawing on the idea of like self-love, right? People can succeed a whole lot of ways. I work with professionals all the time. I'm always listening to their stories about how they have risen to this level of success in their life.
Mm-hmm.
And oftentimes it's this, their critical path was being critical of themselves.
Of themselves, yeah.
And, this kind of like inner, unrelenting, merciless perfectionist that said, nope, it's not good enough. Make it better. Make it better. Make it better. And ultimately, they produced something that was truly exceptional. However, it comes at a cost. There is tension in there, like I'm pulling on an example from a mutual friend of ours, but when you pull on that bowstring, mm-hmm. the tension builds. There's friction. You release the bowstring. It shoots the arrow through the air. That's what makes the mechanism function. And that's one way to get the arrow into the target, right? Mm-hmm. But is it the only way?
No.
Is there a way to collaborate with ourselves, which sounds counterintuitive? It feels like collaboration of two parties.
This is kind of where I'm at, right? So I was describing kind of what I observe in those people who actually achieve what it is that they want to achieve. They kind of change the game, right? But I think kind of where I'm at is, to your point, it's a collaboration. But you're collaborating with the future you, your higher self, right? So,
right.
Yes, there is another way to get the arrow in the bullseye, and it's just simply walking over and punching it in, right? In a lot of ways, it's that simple with challenges that we face relative to time and ourselves. And so it's really, at least for me, what I've observed, it's about seeing who you want to be, being flexible in getting there, right? Who do I want to become? Or who am I becoming? That's the same question. Because one is just like what I'm doing right now will ultimately, the result will be who I become.
Is it fair to say that one of those is more conscious and the other is less conscious, but they're both?
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely a level of awareness, right? So you've got to be aware, I think, of, so you're living in possibility. I think that if I frame it from that perspective, I think it makes more sense. Like you're looking at possibilities. You're saying, I could be this, I could do this, instead of saying I have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
That's more like competition and painstaking, right. And the tension.
Effortful.
I have to force my way through, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or it's, well, I could spend 10 minutes here doing this, and then go over here and do another thing, and then come back,
right?
Do this, do that thing for 10 minutes, and then, there goes my 20 minutes that I needed to accomplish this particular thing.
Yeah.
You're still becoming who you need to become. You've still done that activity with less rigidity,
mm-hmm.
with less gridlock. And I think if we apply that mentality of collaborating, to your point, with time, also collaborating with possibility.
Mm-hmm. I like that a lot.
You're collaborating with both. So you're collaborating with the past for reference, right, on that continuum.
Mm-hmm.
But then you're also collaborating with possibility in the future, where it's, well, this could happen. This could go any scenario.
Right.
We're all essentially walking out or experiencing possibility.
Mm-hmm. Every day.
Every day. Every single day. Every second is just simply possibility. Everything that happens, positive or negative, it was possible. It was in the realm of possibility. it probably wouldn't have happened if it wasn't in the realm of possibility.
It definitely would not have
Right.
happened. Safe to say.
Right. And so I think when we look at like our existence that way, there is less striving. There is more commonality, because I can quite possibly see myself doing anything that anyone else has ever done. And here's another thing. Every single thing that will be achieved by a human being is already in us. It's already there if it's achieved by a human being.
Right.
What's the fastest mile in? Do you know what somebody to run the fastest mile in?
It's under 4.
Under 4. That always existed. It was always
Right.
there. The conditions needed to form
Right.
for the human
Right.
being to be able to do that. But it was always in that human being. It was always a possibility
Yeah.
because it happened.
Right. Quantum physics. Yeah.
Yeah. Everything I need to learn or can possibly learn is achievable.
Right.
I just may not be the one to learn it. I may lay the foundation for it. Someone may listen to this podcast and may have a different perspective, and they may create some theory that helps people learn how to talk less in podcasts. Right? Like, I don't know what it is that they'll learn, but it is possible that they will learn it, and it's possible that I could play a part in it.
Right. And at the end of the day, how different are you from them?
Not different at all.
Not different at all. That's I think the grander idea or point. Not that this is really about making a point. It's really just, it's critical thinking. It's investigating our beliefs and understanding the role that they play. And to kind of put a bow on this, I think of it in terms of, was it Abe Lincoln that was like, if I have to chop down a tree, I'm going to spend the first, 8 hours to chop down a tree, spend the first, however many sharpening the saw.
Yeah.
And I think of competition and collaboration much the same way. So we're going to cut down the tree. Tree's going down. However, the method that we employ for chopping that tree down has consequences on the rest of the day, and how much energy we have left, and how many trees we're able to cut down. And I'm not really a big fan of cutting down trees, so please don't take this as an endorsement of that, but you get the idea. Right? So competition to me is a method. It works. However, I think that it is fairly taxing when compared with collaboration. And I think that it's less efficient than collaboration. I think there is a major differentiator between the two that I think we've danced around a little bit. You know how we like to dance, but
electric slide.
Right. But I don't know that we've really talked about it in detail, and that is this. It's the role of ego. Competition, it's hard for me to conceptualize competition in the absence of ego. And it is also, we'd be hard-pressed to find examples of true collaboration, breakthroughs, game changers, industry disruptors that occurred through collaboration, but were also dominated by ego. Ego tends to take a back seat when we have collaboration, because it's no longer about vying for resources, a resource that we can't both have. It's about recognizing that you're not very different from me, and I'm not very different from you.
Yeah, it's quite possible that we're just reflections of self.
You heard it here first. And just the idea that maybe a win is a win, and that can happen in community. And here I am, Chase the communitarian, back again. But I believe in that power, the power of a group of people to make a difference, to make a change.
Yeah.
For the better.
I mean, every single recording of an orchestra it's about bringing together different pieces and multiple parties or multiple chairs, right? Levels of skill within those different pieces. And at no point do they start competing while the orchestra is actually playing. Right. Now, the competition and the preparation and all that, who's going to get first, second, third chair, all that's happening, well before. But if they go out there, Dallas Symphony Orchestra or, whatever, and they start, the first chair and the second chair start competing, it's going to throw all of it off. The conductor's going to throw the stick at them. I mean, it's going to be crazy, right? Yes. It won't be that symphony, that beautiful sound of collaboration,
right?
From getting all of the appropriate or right pieces in place to make that harmony.
Coordinating with time.
Right. Yeah. And so, I think about that, like, in my daily life, like, if I find myself at any point battling for first chair when I could be involved in the symphony orchestra, could be involved in creating this beautiful thing that will last. Then at that point, it's, I've got to wake myself up. I've got to come into awareness and stop wasting time and energy, right?
When you find yourself competing for first chair, and this isn't necessarily so much for Josiah as it is for the listeners, but I know it still happens to you every now and then, but I just, I think, how about a reminder? You are whole and perfect in this present moment. You're exactly where you need to be. Yeah. You're exactly the way that you're supposed to be right now. This is happening for a reason.
Yeah, your butt is in that chair.
It's a comfy chair. I like it.
Just start playing.
How would you feel about closing out today with a quote?
Sure.
Okay. So here's the quote that I found for us. If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. We don't have attribution for this quote other than it's an African proverb. So, thank you, African proverbs.
Yeah.
See you all next time.
Thank you. The Enzo Podcast is brought to you by Bolton Capital and New Holdings. You can find the Enzo Podcast on Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Music. The song Full Bloom by Yule and Noemina. You can find them wherever you listen to your music.